This is Chapter 8 for Developmental Psych. This is Miss Cannon again. We are going to continue talking about middle and late childhood. The age group to think of is elementary school. Think about, first grade through fifth grade, sixth grade, somewhere along in there. And last time we talked about the physical and cognitive developmental part of these elementary age kids. Today we're going to talk about the social and emotional development of middle and late childhood. If you follow along on the PowerPoint, it should be up now. The way kids in middle and late childhood see themselves is oftentimes a reference to their social groups. For example, they might describe themselves as, I'm a Boy Scout, or I'm a soccer player. They begin to compare themselves to others at this age. And the other thing that kids do in this elementary age group, they begin to be able to take perspective on things. They're more able to see someone else's perspective. Their executive function begins to improve. They can control their own thoughts more, and they're beginning to consider other people's thoughts and perspectives. I have two words up there, self-esteem and self-concept. And although they look alike, they are not the same definition. Self-esteem is defined as the way somebody evaluates themselves overall. For the book says, I think, a global evaluation of the self. It's how you think of yourself just as a person and as who you are, whereas self-concept is different. It's more specific. It would be how good of a student you see yourself. Self-esteem is more like, yeah, I'm a pretty good person, whereas self-concept is more related to what you can do. Oh, I am a marathon runner and I'm really good at that. Or I'm a great cook. So one of the things that is related to self-esteem, that global overall feeling of whether you're okay or not, is whether these kids were securely attached as infants. If you remember back to the attachment types and babies and how they attach to their caregivers, if they were securely attached to that caregiver, they are more likely to have high self-esteem in this developmental stage, the middle and late childhood stage. I have on there the problem with praise. When we talk about self-esteem, people often think about, oh, it's important to praise kids. And while it is, it's important to think about how you praise kids. Self-esteem doesn't increase if you are just giving kids empty praise. Oh, you're the best. Oh, you're great, and things that aren't specific. Praise is much more effective if you praise the process that child is going through, if you praise maybe a moral decision that they've made. So it needs to be specific with a process, not like, oh, you're the smartest kid ever, because that tends to lead to that inflated self-esteem and tends to lead to kids that are what we call praise junkies. They have to have praise to get through the day. So So that's the problem with praise, just that empty praise doesn't work well. Continuing on with personality development, there are a couple terms up there. Self-efficacy just means that you believe that you can do something. If someone has self-efficacy for school, they truly believe that they can do the math that's set out before them. They have more confidence. So that term is self-efficacy. Self-regulation, on the other hand, is being able to regulate yourself, just like what it sounds. It's that deliberate effort to manage thoughts and behaviors. And kids at this level of development in middle and late childhood are beginning to be able to monitor themselves more closely. They're able to manage their thoughts and their emotions and their behaviors better. The next term on the PowerPoint, industry versus inferiority. And if you remember Erik Erikson and all of his stages, it's always one thing versus another thing. And kids in this stage of development, they are trying to solve the industry versus inferiority crisis. And let me explain that. Industry just means that kids at this age are more interested in how things are made, how they work. So industry is the term there. When kids are encouraged to be industrious, when they are encouraged to try things on their own, figure out how things work, that sort of thing, they are more likely to be able to become industrious, okay? And they're less likely to feel inferior. Let me give you a definition, or actually an example of that. I know that probably was not very clear. Let's say that you have a 7-year-old, and that 7-year-old really likes to build things, but as a parent of a 7-year-old, you know what a big mess that always makes. You've always got blocks out, you've always got all kinds of materials out, and so you say, no, you can't do that, you can't do that. It's too big of a mess for me to clean up. Well, in that case, the parent is probably not allowing the child to develop the industry part of this equation here, and the child may actually end up feeling inferior at this point. Take another example, cooking, for example. You've got a 7-year-old wants to make their own dinner within reason, but you know that's going to cause a huge mess, but you say, okay, well, go ahead, make your macaroni and cheese or whatever. And as that child is allowed to try what they think they can do, industry, they gain confidence. So when that 7-year-old child makes the macaroni and cheese, he or she can feel like they've conquered that, less likely to feel inferior because they can't do things. So the name of the game at this stage is just parents allowing the kids to do what they can for themselves within reason. When parents jump in and take things over, and because it's going to be a big mess or because it's more trouble if the kid does it, that doesn't allow children in this developmental stage to develop that sense of industry. Kids in the middle childhood stage are beginning to understand their emotions better. They are more internal in their focus. When they were younger, their reactions might be all about how somebody else is reacting emotionally. So If their friend is sad, they might be sad too. Well, this age, they're more able to see how they are really feeling and not be tied to the other people's reactions. They understand that more than one emotion can go with the situation. They're more aware of events that lead up to emotional reactions. They're more able to suppress their negative emotions. Let's say, something not so good happens at school. Well, they can hold on to that temper tantrum and not have it and get home and be able to let their steam off. They're more able to self-soothe at this age, so they get their feelings hurt at school and maybe they don't cry at that point. Maybe they talk to themselves internally and say, you know what, that's okay. I'll be friends with that person later, maybe they just didn't want to play today. That's self-soothing. They're more able to cope with stress at this age because they can use their cognitive skills, their thinking skills, to deal with the stress that they may be under. The next slide is about moral development, and Lawrence Kohlberg is the main researcher on moral development that your book talks about. And I just have the 3 main stages of moral development listed. There are some sub-stages under there that you'll see in your book on page 225. But kids at this age are beginning to develop their thinking about what's right, what's wrong, what's good, what's bad. And children in the pre-conventional level, that number 1, pre-conventional level, they determine what is good or bad or right or wrong just by rewards and punishment. So kids obey the rules because they're afraid they'll get in trouble if they don't. They also, at this pre-conventional level, the first one, they treat other kids well because they want to be treated well. The golden rule. Well, if I'm nice to this person, they'll probably be nice to me back. And that's the pre-conventional level. The second level of Kohlberg's moral development is the conventional level. And this is mostly for adolescents and older. People have standards, usually the standards that their parents have set for them, the government set for them, and they obey because they see a reason for that rule. That rule's there to protect them, and also to gain approval. Kids obey their parents to gain their parents' approval. And this is the next step up. It's conventional level. The post-conventional level, number 3, not everybody gets there, okay, no matter how old you are. At this level, people define their own moral code, and they can see other moral codes. They see that human rights can be above the law, and people at this level follow their conscience even when it's a huge risk to do that. An example of that would be thinking about what happened during the 1940s in Europe with the Holocaust. Some people who were at the post-conventional level hid people who the Nazi Party was trying to arrest and take away to concentration camps. They hid people in their homes, they helped the Jews, that sort of thing. Those people were at the post-conventional level. They knew it was the law that they not do that, but they chose to break the law. So post-conventional level thinking is civil disobedience and that sort of thing, that their moral reasoning is that even though the law says this, that the moral code is higher than that. I'm going to go back to moral code. Peers play a really important role in moral development. And when you think about it, that really makes sense. Kids gain a lot of their ideas, their moral ideas, from the group they hang around. So if the group of kids they're with thinks one thing is okay and it's really not, they may be adopting that that idea that, oh, this is okay because my peers do it. Okay, and that's all I have to say about moral development. Moving on to gender differences. Gender stereotyping just means that there are general beliefs about boys and girls, and the stereotype just simply means that people think that math is for boys, reading's for girls. That's a stereotype, and it's not true. They're just broad categories that reflect real general beliefs about boys and girls. Okay. There are some differences in the male and the female brain. The parietal lobe in the brain that's involved in spatial skills tends to be a little bit larger in males, and in females, the parts of the brain that are involved in expressing emotions, they show more metabolic activity. When you look on fMRI, functional MRI, you can see more activity going on. Women tend to have slightly better verbal skills than men. And the thing with math, we kind of have a stereotype that boys are better in math, but the book talks about a study that was done that virtually showed no differences between boys and girls in math, but that the girls have more negative attitudes about math, and that the teachers expected less of them and the parents expected less of them in math. So I thought that was interesting, that maybe some of the differences are not as big as we think they are. Gender differences in socio-emotional development. Aggression-wise, boys are more physically aggressive in all cultures, and that makes sense. We see that. But girls are more verbally aggressive when it comes to play. Whereas a boy would maybe punch somebody, a girl might say something mean, or she might rally her friends together to shun somebody else. So those are some differences with gender. The term androgyny simply means having both masculine and feminine qualities in the same person, and it's something that's much more accepted in the US and less so in other countries. So androgyny is, I guess, kind of the opposite of gender stereotyping. So maybe thinking that, oh, girls are supposed to cook and boys are supposed to go out and work outside. Well, androgyny says that, boys might like to cook too, and girls might like to work outside. Okay, moving on to the next slide with families. The changing role of parents in the elementary years, middle and late childhood. Kids spend less time with their parents. They're in school all day. Parents' roles change. They function more as gatekeepers as kids become more responsible for themselves, which leads us into the next term, co-regulation. That's just a fancy word for parent and child both being responsible for the behavior. Whereas in the preschool years, in early childhood, the parents really were pretty much responsible for monitoring all of the child's behavior. Well, during this developmental stage, some of that control is transferred from the parent to the child. The child is more responsible for regulating their own behavior. I think it was interesting on page 236, there's a question there that requires a little bit higher level thinking. It's on 236. And as a human development specialist, how would you advise divorced families on strategies to ease their children's adjustment to remarriage? And page 236 talks about step families and how divorce has become so commonplace, and that as you go through, as children go through divorce, this was from chapters back, most of them tend to do okay after about a year. One of the things that your book mentions is that parents who remarry face some struggles that others may not. And the step family faces those struggles as well. Your book mentions that about only 1/3 of step family couples stay married. So the idea in that is that children who are going to be part of a step family may need some extra support adjusting to the new step family. They've got they've got maybe a different male figure in the house, different female figure in the house, different rules, possibly different expectations. The most complex type of step family is a blended step family, and in that but in that situation with a blended family, both the mother and the father had children previously and brought those into the marriage, so that there are now step siblings. So that's a good question on page 236. How would you advise divorced parents on strategies to ease their children's adjustment to the new remarriage? Okay, moving on to peers. Sociometric status is a fancy word for how much kids are either liked or not liked by their peers. Your book mentions sociometric studies, and that is a way for kids to be basically classified into these 5 different categories. So for a sociometric status would be like where maybe a classroom teacher would, and I'm not sure that they would really even do this, but probably a researcher would ask kids how much they liked or disliked their classmates, and obviously not where they would know about, the other classmates would know about that, but they asked children to nominate the ones they liked the most and the ones they liked the least. So kids at this age are categorized into 5 different statuses, and some of them are pretty self-explanatory. The popular children, those are the ones that were nominated the most as a best friend. Other kids didn't dislike them very often. Most kids were like, yeah, that's my best friend. And so those were the popular kids. The average kids in this assessment, they had about an average number of positive and negative nominations. Yeah, I really like that person, or I really dislike that person. There was an average number of likes and dislikes. Neglected children were just like they sounded. They weren't nominated very much as a best friend, but they weren't really disliked. And the rejected children were the ones that were not nominated and they were disliked. Then the controversial children were the ones they were frequently nominated as the best friend, but they were also nominated as being disliked. So as you look at those categories, think about what could be some problems that would result with kids being in those categories. The rejected children, they were the ones that had the most adjustment problems, and they were the ones that were the most impulsive. They were more, especially the boys, were more emotionally reactive, meaning that they got angry easier. They had a harder time calming down. And these kids, the rejected kids, just didn't have the social skills that some of the others did. Compared to some characteristics of some popular kids, the popular kids were good listeners. They were able to control their negative emotions. They were more comfortable just being themselves. So those of you that are thinking about going into education and teaching, this is something to look for in your classrooms, just to see where those kids are. Not necessarily to do a test like this, but to just, look out for those neglected children, look out for those rejected children. Okay, next slide is social cognition. Still talking about peers. Kids just, social cognition is just thoughts about what's going on socially. So for example, if a child sees another classmate's behavior as inappropriate, this would be social cognition. And this becomes really important in late childhood. Kids are able to look at other kids' behavior and see that it's not appropriate, and hence those kids may be some of the ones that are more rejected or neglected. Dodge did some research on how we process information about our social world. And one of the interesting things in this research is that boys that were aggressive themselves were more likely to see another kid's actions as hostile or aggressive, even if the other kid didn't mean to, or it didn't have any, there really wasn't any negative to it. Let me give you an example for that. I know I'm not explaining that very well. Let's say in a 4th grade classroom that One kid is sitting with his feet out in the aisle at his desk, and a child who is aggressive walks down the aisle and trips over that kid's feet. If that kid who tripped is an aggressive kid, he's likely to see that that kid tripped me. Whereas if the kid who tripped, who's walking down the aisle, was not necessarily aggressive, he would maybe think, he or she would think, well, that person had their feet out. I wasn't looking. Oh, well. So that's just the way, the difference in processing information. Bullying is becoming a really big issue in our society. It's reported that 1 in 3 students experience bullying, either as the victim or the perpetrator. So 1/3 of all kids are going to be involved in bullying of some sort. Either they were the one that bullied or they were the one that got bullied. Olveus Program for Prevention is a school-wide, community-wide program for bullying prevention. It was, I believe that Olveus is from Norway. It's one that's been proven to be very effective, and it's prevention. It's also intervention, meaning like when someone is being bullied, there are plans for intervention. But mostly it's prevention, helping kids not ever get in the middle of the bullying and not start. Okay, thinking about schools for these elementary age kids, 2 approaches to teaching are the constructivist approach and the direct instruction approach. The constructivist approach is centered on the learner. The students' activities are what guides them. The teacher guides them in their activities, but the students are the one that explore. The students are the one that get to figure things out. They get to reflect on what they're learning. They get to discover. They get to think critically. So if you remember back from the preschool, think about Montessori school. The kids were completely on their own with the teacher just as the facilitator to help guide their learning, but the kids were doing the exploration. The kids were choosing what they did. So that's a constructivist approach. It's like a discovery approach. The kids are exploring, discovering, reflecting. Whereas a direct instruction approach is what I'm doing right now, lecturing to you. It's very structured, it's teacher-centered. There's high expectations for good progress. Academic tasks are the most important, and student learning time is the most important thing. Now, it's not like one of these is right and one of them is wrong. Effective teachers are both of these things. They allow for discovery. They allow for reflection and critical thinking as a constructivist, but they also do direct instruction because things have to be, sometimes you just have to tell kids something. Sometimes you just have to show them how it's done. So effective teachers are both. In thinking about school, you guys probably all know about mandated tests, accountability. NCLB stands for No Child Left Behind, that legislation that went into effect in 2002, which has been modified over and over. with accountability, states get to pretty much decide on what test they will use to determine whether their students are meeting the criteria. I'm going to go back just a minute. And one of the things that's interesting, your book talks about it, let's see, page 241. Each state may have different criteria for what they count as passing as failing in their state mandated tests. So let's, your book gives this example. I thought it was really interesting. It looks like, if you look at Mississippi, that almost every fourth grader in Mississippi knows how to read. And if you look at the scores for Massachusetts, it looks like only about 50% of the kids in Massachusetts know how to read. Well, that's not actually the case. Actually, the case is that Mississippi has set the bar pretty low for what counts as being able to read and what counts as passing. And Massachusetts has set that bar very high. So you can't just look at state mandated tests and determine how well kids are learning. You have to look at the criteria for that. I just thought that was kind of interesting. Looking at the next slide, SES, ethnicity and culture. SES stands for socioeconomic status, and low income, poverty, it does present some problems for learning. So kids, low SES and ethnicity are oftentimes intertwined. They're like together. So those things can present problems for learning. They don't have the access to the better schools. Teachers are less experienced oftentimes that are in the low SES school. And your book talks about Elliot Aronson from University of Texas. And there's an article on him and talking about his jigsaw classroom and how effective that was. He worked on this jigsaw classroom. Basically, what that was, it's cooperative groups that would work on a different part of a project to reach a common goal. And he had kids from all different ethnic backgrounds, very diverse. And he was very effective in this because he focused on helping them reach their goals through working together, so they could see how they were alike and they could see how they could work together. So that's a really cool story in your book. The next slide is titled Mindset. And if you haven't learned anything from this lecture so far, learn this. This is really important. It's something really cool coming on the horizon. Mindset is a book by a lady, Carol Dweck. She's a psychologist. Your book mentions her. I would encourage you to look at that. She says that people have one of two mindsets. Either you have a fixed mindset, meaning that you think your qualities are carved in stone. They can't change. So let's say you have a fixed mindset about psychology. I just can't learn that stuff. It's over my head. That's a fixed mindset. A growth mindset is where people think that their qualities can change and they can improve by giving effort. And for example, let's say you maybe didn't pass your first developmental psych test. You got an F on it. Well, a growth mindset would tell you, I did not do well on that test. I probably need to read my chapter a little more thoroughly, probably need to spend more time getting ready for that test. I maybe need to go talk to Mr. Shaw, thinking about how you can do better. And a growth mindset tells us that, yeah, I can improve. And her book is called Mindset, The New Psychology of Success. And she has a TED Talk that I'm going to encourage you to go find. I'm going to see if I can play it on here. I'm not sure if it's going to work. TED Talks are really cool. They are, you just look under TED, TED Talk, and they're talks, they're lectures that people give on what's new and up and coming. And there's all kinds of things. There's science, there's psychology, there's relationship things, and they're really cool. So TED, TED, Talks, TALKS, TED Talks, or TED Talk. And I'm going to try to play the one that is called The Power of Believing That You Can Improve. And this is Carol Dweck's TED Talk.
The power of yet. I heard about a high school in Chicago where students had to pass a certain number of courses to graduate, and if they didn't pass a course, they got the grade not yet. And I thought that was fantastic, because if you get a failing grade, you think, I'm nothing, I'm nowhere. But if you get the grade not yet, you understand that you're on a learning curve. It gives you a path into the future. Not yet also gave me insight into a critical event early in my career, a real turning point. I wanted to see how children coped with challenge and difficulty. So I gave 10-year-olds problems that were slightly too hard for them. Some of them reacted in a shockingly positive way. They said things like, I love a challenge, or, I was hoping this would be informative. They understood that their abilities could be developed. They had what I call a growth mindset. But other students felt it was tragic, catastrophic. From their more fixed mindset perspective, their intelligence had been up for judgment, and they failed. Instead of luxuriating in the power of yet, they were gripped in the tyranny of now. So what did they do next? I'll tell you what they do next. In one study, they told us they would probably cheat the next time instead of studying more if they failed a test. In another study, after a failure, they looked for someone who did worse than they did so they could feel really good about themselves. And in study after study, they have run from difficulty. Scientists measured the electrical activity from the brain as students confronted an error. On the left, you see the fixed mindset students. There's hardly any activity. They run from the error. They don't engage with it. But on the right, you have the students with the growth mindset, the idea that abilities can be developed. They engage deeply. Their brain is on fire with yet. They engage deeply. They process the error. They learn from it, and they correct it. How are we raising our children? Are we raising getting A's? Are we raising kids who don't know how to dream big dreams? Their biggest goal is getting the next A or the next test score? Are they carrying this need for constant validation with them into their future lives? Maybe because employers are coming to me and saying, we have already raised a generation of young workers who can't get through the day without an award. So, what can we do? How can we build that bridge to get? Here are some things we can do. First of all, we can praise wisely, not praising intelligence or talent. That has failed. Don't do that anymore, but praising the process that kids engage in. Their effort, their strategies, their focus, their perseverance, their improvement. This process praise creates kids who are hardy and resilient. There are other ways to reward yet. We recently teamed up with game scientists from the University of Washington to create a new online math game that rewarded yet. In this game, students were rewarded for effort, strategy, and progress. The usual math game rewards you for getting answers right now. But this game rewarded process. And we got more effort, more strategies, more engagement over longer periods of time, and more perseverance when they hit really, really hard problems. Just the words yet or not yet, we're finding, give kids greater confidence. Give them a path into the future that creates greater persistence. And we can actually change students' mindsets. In one study, we taught them that every time they push out of their comfort zone to learn something new and difficult, the neurons in their brain can form new, stronger connections, and over time, they can get smarter. Look what happened. In this study, students who were not taught this growth mindset continued to show declining grades over this difficult school transition. But those who were taught this lesson showed a sharp rebound in their grades. We have shown this now, this kind of improvement, with thousands and thousands of kids, especially struggling students. So let's talk about equality. In our country, there are groups of students who chronically underperform. For example, children in inner cities or children on Native American reservations. And they've done so poorly for so long that many people think it's inevitable. But when educators create growth mindset classrooms steeped in yet, equality happens. And here are just a few examples. In 1 year, a kindergarten class in Harlem, New York, scored in the 95th percentile on the National Achievement Test. Many of those kids could not hold a pencil when they arrived at school. In 1 year, fourth grade students in the South Bronx, way behind, became the #1 fourth grade class in the state of New York on the state math test. In a year to a year and a half, Native American students in a school on a reservation went from the bottom of their district to the top. And that district included affluent sections of Seattle. So the Native kids outdid the Microsoft kids. This happened because the meaning of effort and difficulty were transformed. Before, effort and difficulty made them feel dumb, made them feel like giving up. But now, effort and difficulty, that's when their neurons are making new connections, stronger connections. That's when they're getting smarter. I received a letter recently from a 13-year-old boy. He said, "Dear Professor Dweck, I appreciate that your writing is based on solid scientific research. And that's why I decided to put it into practice. I put more effort into my schoolwork, into my relationship with my family, and into my relationship with kids at school. And I experienced great improvement in all of those areas. I now realize I've wasted most of my life. Let's not waste any more lives. Because once we know that abilities are capable of such growth, it becomes a basic human right for children, all children, to live in places that create that growth, to live in places filled with yet. Thank you.
So I hope you were able to hear that. And even if you couldn't, if you'll go to TED.com and type in Carol Dweck, like what is mentioned in your book, DWECK, and here on the PowerPoint, you'll be able to see that video.